Imagine walking into a room full of young, confident martial artists, only to have every one of them laugh at you before class even begins. That was exactly what happened to Ethel, a petite, elderly black woman whose arrival at a local karate class drew smirks, whispers, and outright ridicule. But what none of them knew was that Ethel was not just a student. She was a black belt master with decades of experience, and she was about to turn their assumptions upside down. The gym smelled of sweat, polished wood, and the faint tang of antiseptic, an aroma familiar to anyone who's spent time in a dojo. Today, though, it carried an undercurrent of curiosity and subtle mockery. The sliding door squeaked as Ethel stepped inside, her cane clicking softly against the floor. Heads turned. Whispers swirled. At first glance, she looked fragile. Her frame was small, her back slightly hunched with age, and her white hair framed a face lined with decades of life. She wore a simple gi, neatly pressed, but nothing about her attire hinted at the storm she carried beneath. A few younger students exchanged glances, smirks tugging at the corners of their mouths. "Is she joining us?" one teenager asked under his breath, barely suppressing a laugh. "Looks like Grandma wants to fight," another muttered. Ethel's eyes swept the room, calm, deliberate, taking in every detail, the uneven spacing of the mats, the way the instructor adjusted his belt mid-pose, the nervous energy of the new students fidgeting in their stances. She didn't flinch. She didn't smile. She simply nodded a quiet greeting and moved to a corner, away from the snickers. The instructor, a man in his 30s with a booming voice and a confident stance, clapped his hands together. "All right, everyone. Let's start with some basic stretches and warm-ups." As the class began, the whispers didn't stop. Some students made exaggerated stretches, sneaking glances at Ethel to see if she could even manage the simplest moves.
She did.
With slow, deliberate precision, she bent, twisted, and extended, each motion fluid, controlled, and remarkably strong for someone her age. One student, trying to hide his embarrassment, muttered loudly enough for a few others to hear, "I bet she can't even kick halfway up." Ethel didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her silence carried weight, a quiet confidence that seemed almost imperceptible at first, but it unsettled the class. By the end of warm-ups, the young students were restless, their competitive energy tinged with condescension. They couldn't imagine that this tiny, elderly woman could hold her own in any martial art. They were blind to decades of discipline, countless hours of practice, and battles fought far from this small-town dojo. And that was exactly what Ethel intended. She didn't need to prove herself just yet. First impressions were meant to deceive, to lower defenses. In her corner, she adjusted her gi, a faint smile touching her lips. Soon they would all see. As the class continued, Ethel's movements remained smooth, controlled, almost meditative. But in the back of her mind, she drifted away from the bright fluorescent lights and the murmurs of mockery. Memories of her younger self came rushing in, memories that carried both triumph and struggle. She was a teenager in a crowded, gritty dojo in the city, the smell of sweat and incense thick in the air. At first, she had been laughed at there too, mocked for being small, a girl in a world dominated by men. But Ethel had grit. She had fire. Every punch thrown at her was met with determination, every sneer with unwavering focus. Her instructors, initially skeptical of her potential, eventually recognized something rare, a natural rhythm, a discipline that went beyond muscle and technique. Years passed. Ethel earned her first black belt in secret competitions, often outmatching opponents twice her size. She traveled across states, attending tournaments where she was underestimated at every turn. The world seemed eager to dismiss her, to see her fail, but she rarely did. Her black belt wasn't just a piece of cloth. It was a symbol of decades of relentless dedication, countless bruises, and victories earned quietly, without applause. She remembered the most pivotal lesson from her mentor. Strength is not measured by size, but by consistency, courage, and the mind behind the body. Those words became her mantra. Even now, In this small-town dojo filled with dismissive faces, she could feel the power of that wisdom in every fiber of her being. The younger students, unaware of her history, continued their exaggerated kicks and whispered taunts. They couldn't see the countless hours Ethel had spent perfecting the subtle art of balance, the mental discipline to anticipate an opponent's move, the speed hidden in seemingly gentle motions. They didn't know that one swift motion could bring a seasoned fighter to the ground. They didn't know that this quiet, elderly woman had faced and overcome far greater challenges than they could ever imagine. Her flashbacks also brought moments of hardship, injuries that refused to heal, doors closed because of her race and gender, skepticism from peers, and the loneliness of being the only woman in many dojos. But every challenge had sharpened her, forged her into a master capable of moving with precision and strength, regardless of the assumptions of those around her. As she returned her attention to the present, Ethel's calmness was no longer just serenity, it was power, poised and ready to reveal itself at the right moment. She knew the class would soon witness something they could never unsee. The laughter, the underestimation, the subtle scorn, they were all setting the stage for the revelation of her true skill. The moment arrived like a quiet storm. The instructor called for paired sparring exercises, and the students groaned, some nervously eyeing each other. Then, with a subtle nod from the teacher, a confident teenager, tall, muscular, and brimming with arrogance, was paired with Ethel. "Ready, Grandma?" he sneered, bouncing lightly on his heels, smirking at the rest of the class. Ethel simply bowed, her posture calm, composed, and utterly unshaken. "Whenever you are," she replied softly. Her voice carried no threat, but it carried certainty, the kind only decades of mastery can instill. The bell rang. The teenager lunged, overconfident, aiming a quick jab at her torso. Ethel shifted her weight, fluidly sidestepping, her movement almost invisible to the untrained eye. In a split second, she redirected his momentum, using his own energy to guide him into a perfect controlled fall. The room went silent. "What how?" someone whispered. A collective gasp filled the dojo. The teenager scrambled up, eyes wide, heart racing, but Ethel stood calm, hands poised, her expression serene. Every kick, every strike she executed afterward was precise, measured, and impossibly fast. It wasn't brute force, it was skill honed over decades. Within minutes, she had demonstrated control, agility, and tactical intelligence that left the young fighters dumbfounded. Some students tried to retaliate, thinking they could overpower her with sheer strength or speed. Every attempt was met with the same result. Ethel moved with effortless grace, countering with subtle but devastating efficiency. She wasn't just defending herself, she was teaching. Each controlled move was a lesson in humility, focus, and respect. The instructor finally raised his hands, signaling an end to the session. "Everyone take a bow," he said, his voice trembling slightly with awe. The students obeyed, their faces a mixture of embarrassment, respect, and disbelief. They had underestimated her from the moment she stepped into the dojo, and now their assumptions lay shattered at their feet. Ethel, breathing steadily, returned a gentle smile. "Strength isn't always obvious," she said softly, "and skill isn't measured by age, size, or appearance." Her words sank in, leaving a lasting impression far deeper than any punch or kick could. For the rest of the session, the atmosphere shifted. Where there had been mockery, there was now attentiveness. Where there had been laughter, there was reverence. Ethel's presence transformed the room, not through intimidation, but through the quiet, undeniable authority of mastery and experience. By the end of the day, one thing was clear: the dojo and everyone in it would never underestimate anyone again, because they had learned a lesson that went beyond martial arts. True strength often comes hidden, and the most powerful people aren't always the ones who look the part. If Ethel's story amazed you, don't keep it to yourself. Hit like to show your respect for hidden strength, subscribe for more inspiring tales that challenge assumptions, and share this video to remind others that true power isn't always obvious. Comment below, Who else do you think has an underestimated story waiting to be told?